Okay, good evening, everybody. Nice to see everybody. Can people hear me okay? Okay, great. Okay, so thank you, as always, to Miriam Friedman for keeping me on task. Unfortunately, some months Miriam needs to work harder to keep me on task than others. I think this was, I think Miriam had to send me something like 3 reminder emails before I got my act together. So I'm even more grateful to Miriam than normal. So thank you very much to Miriam. Thank you also to all the people who submitted questions. As we've said before, those questions really are what make the structure for our discussion. And the topic for our shir tonight is Muktzah. To be candid, there definitely were questions that were submitted. The number of questions were a little bit less, I think, than normal. So even more so, I certainly welcome people's follow-up questions, which my guess is once we get started, there'll be a lot of follow-up questions. As we normally do, I'll ask people to hold questions until the end. You're certainly welcome to put questions in on the chat, but I'm most likely not going to respond to them until the end. Okay, question number 1, and as always, it happens to be that all the questions came from a lot of knowledge already, but there's a lot of backdrop information in each question. Question number 1 is as follows. If a person has potato peels on the counter, may they clean off the potato peels from the counter, or are they muktzah? Now let's just talk a little bit about what that question really means. Let's describe a little bit how muktzah works. The rabbis wanted it to be that Shabbos was a special day for people, and they wanted it to be that everything that a person was moving and dealing with on Shabbos will be something that would have some relevance for Shabbos. We don't think of it this way. We think of it that like certain things are off limits as muktzah. That's how we think of it. Technically speaking, everything on Shabbos is either muktzah or not muktzah. Everything is. And really, if we're going to get technical, probably the better question is, what relevance does something have to Shabbos? Because if it doesn't, it's muktzah. So whereas I think the way we normally think, and this is understandable, but the way we normally think is we live in our normal homes and everything is normal, and every now and then there's something muktzah. Generally speaking, it's where it's not supposed to be, but that's okay. But every now and then there's something muktzah. But really, the real halachic approach is one asks oneself, is this thing relevant to Shabbos? If it is relevant to Shabbos, it's not muktzah. And if it's not relevant to Shabbos, it is muktzah. And there are different categories of muktzah, which we may or may not get into tonight. So the question is a very interesting question. Generally speaking, broadly speaking, there are a few different categories for what would make something not muktzah. Food is not muktzah. What we mean when we say food is edible food, food in an edible form on Shabbos. That's one thing to think about. Utensils that are relevant to Shabbos are not muktzah. So a fork, for example, would not be muktzah, but a pen isn't. You don't have the normal thing a pen would be used for is prohibited to do on Shabbos, to write. So a pen would be muktzah. And Sfarim, sacred books, are also not considered muktzah. After that, what you really have to ask yourself is, essentially, is something food or food edible for Shabbos, or a vessel that's appropriate for Shabbos? Now, when you think about it, the vast majority of the things that we interact with on Shabbos are one of those things. Nerds, don't get stressed out from it. But the question is a very interesting question. Potato peels. So again, let's just draw up the scenario. The person who asked the question does not have to reveal their identity, so they don't have anything to feel awkward about. But probably the scenario of this question is a person was peeling potatoes before Shabbos, and there are potato peels left on the counter and didn't have time to clean it off because we're busy before Shabbos, of course. And whatever, they look and they see potato peels on the counter. We don't eat potato peels. That's not food. It comes from potatoes, but it's not food at this point. So is there any allowance to move the potato peels on Shabbos? So I want to tell you, anyone who says that all those rabbis came and put all those tough halachos on us There are many challenging halachas from the rabbis, but keep in mind this halacha because the rabbis were very gracious about this one. The concept of muktzah is from the rabbis. It's rabbinic in nature. It's not a Torah halacha. It's a rabbinic halacha. The rabbis made a major exception to the laws of muktzah, and that is graf shel rei. Now, graf shel rei is a Talmudic term. Graf shel rei means the contents of a chamber pot. So a chamber pot, when you what finds in a chamber pot, graf shel rei really is a chamber pot. Excuse me. It could very well, certainly the contents of the chamber pot could be muktzah. One certainly doesn't have a function for the contents of a chamber pot. The modern day version, by the way, that's relevant to more of us, certainly present company included, is a dirty diaper, right? What function do you have from a dirty diaper? So the rabbi said something like graf shel rei, it's disgusting. It will disturb your Shabbos. So the rabbi said, look, we created the idea of muktzah. So since we created the idea of muktzah, we are going to create a leniency, which is if there's anything that would technically be muktzah, but is disgusting, you're allowed to pick it up and take it wherever you want and put it down in a place that won't be disgusting and then be finished with it. So that's the reason why a person can move a dirty diaper on Shabbos. Thank God, right? That's the reason possibly why it's okay to take out garbage on Shabbos, because your kitchen is going to become a pigsty, with this overflowing bag of garbage or 5 different bags of garbage lying around. It's going to be an eyesore. Could be garbage is in muktzah for another reason, but you don't even have to come onto it. And that's also why something like potato peels on your counter, if you're in the kitchen, if you have people coming into the kitchen, and it would be sort of embarrassing or awkward, you could be lenient about that and just clean it up. Now, I do want to clarify that, as is logical based on what we're saying, the allowance of graf shel rei is rooted in the scenario being that it's disgusting for me where I am, or it's unpleasant where I am. If I have a downstairs kitchen, some extra kitchen, and somebody was peeling potato peels down there and they forgot to clean up, okay? And no one's going to be there the rest of Shabbos. It's hard to say that you're allowed to clean it up because of graf shel rei. It has nothing to do with graf shel. It's not disturbing anybody. But if it's disgusting in the place that you find yourself, you are allowed to clean it up. That is a very important allowance on Hilchos Shabbos. And my guess is there'll be some follow-up questions. I already saw one in the chat. There's a lot of things that one is allowed to move because of the concept of graf shel rei. Let's say a person said to themselves, I don't think you have to be super discerning about this, but let's say for whatever reason, a person said to themselves, I can't say it's terribly bothersome. It's not terribly bothersome, but I'd rather not than yes, So truth be told, if it's something's disturbing to a person, you could move it indirectly. You could do that also. Again, I think the specific example of potato peels, I think if you're in the kitchen, I think it's reasonable. But let's say the potato peels were on the downstairs kitchen counter and no one's going to be around those Shabbos. But I don't know, you're worried it'll attract bugs or something. I don't know if that's a good example, but it's not that anyone's going to be disgusted by it. You're just nervous about it. So there, if you moved it indirectly, let's say you could do it different ways. You could kind of, brush it with your elbow or something like that, or take like a paper plate and kind of like brush it into another paper plate. The point is, if you're using something which we normally use as a utensil, that's probably not so good. In order to do it with like a fork, it's a little questionable because a fork is kind of considered an extension of my hand. But if you move it in a more indirect way, that would be okay as well. Okay, so that's issue number 1. Again, there'll be plenty of times for questions at the end. Okay, issue number 2 is a totally different question. This is a great question. I'm going to use the term that we used growing up. I don't know how many of you relate to this term. In my home growing up, we had a junk drawer. We had a junk drawer. What was in the junk drawer? Again, I'm getting some knowing smiles. What was in the junk drawer? The junk drawer was a drawer in the kitchen, and it seemed like anything that couldn't find another logical place in the house ended up in that drawer. There were some very practical things in that drawer. There were pens and rubber bands, by the way, seemed to migrate very frequently to that drawer. But there were pens, but there were other stuff. There was a show directory was probably in the junk drawer. There were all kinds of things. A spare key might be in the junk drawer. There were all kinds of things in the junk. Now, just as an aside, if anyone on the Zoom talks to my parents anytime soon, I did not give this example. And if I did, it was from my neighbor's house, not from my parents' house. Let me just clarify that. But theoretically speaking, if someone had a junk drawer, there are things in the junk drawer that are muktzah. But there are things in the junk drawer that are not muktzah. Okay? So there are pens in the junk drawer, and there's a shul directory in the junk drawers, and you want to open the junk drawer to find out someone's address because that's where you're going for Shabbos lunch. Okay? May I, A, open the junk drawer, B, take out the non-muktzah item from the junk drawer, and then C, close the junk drawer? This is a great question, and there's a lot of halacha in this question. And this is the halachic issue of basis. Basis of davar ha'asur, which means that within the realm of muktzah, you have a muktzah item. If a muktzah item is being supported by a non-muktzah item, the non-muktzah item takes on the muktzah status of the muktzah item. Okay, so just to give a classic example is if a person has a folding table, and at the outset of Shabbos, the only thing on the folding table are tea lights to light the candles for Shabbos. Okay, that's the only thing on the table. And the person intended for the tea lights to be there before Shabbos. So then the table is considered to be sort of subservient in a sense to the tea lights. The tea lights are muktzah. The table takes on the muktzah status of the tea lights. So that's part of the question here. So the question is, you have this junk drawer and you have pens in the junk drawer, for example. So is the drawer muktzah because the pens are in there? So that's a really good question. So in terms of the laws of basis, in terms of this idea of the non-muktzah item becoming subservient to the muktzah item, so the way it works is as follows. The muktzah item only defines the non-muktzah item if there's no non-muktzah item of comparable significance for Shabbos. If there is a non-muktzah item of comparable significance for Shabbos, or significance in general, then the drawer is not defined by the pen. The drawer is defined by the pen and the shul directory. The shul directory is important for me to have, right? Because to find addresses and the like. So since the shul directory is important for me to have, the drawer in halacha is not considered subservient to the pens. It's for both. But what that means is it's not considered to be a sole extension of the pens, which means it's fine for me to open the drawer to pull out the shul directory. Okay? Now, there's another aspect of this question. Fine. So the drawer is not muktzah. But every time I open the drawer, aren't I also moving the pens? So if I'm also moving the pens, isn't that a problem? So the halacha is that if there would be an easy way that's not going to damage things, if there'd be an easy way to indirectly move the muktzah thing out, so that every time I'm opening and closing the drawer, I'm not moving the muktzah back and forth, it would be appropriate to indirectly move the muktzah out. Having said that, I don't think there's an easy way to do that with your junk drawer. And if there's not a convenient way to do that, then you're fine. Okay? So the drawer, now if the only thing in the junk drawer are muktzah items, or the only non-muktzah items in the junk drawer are completely irrelevant and insignificant, then the drawer is indeed muktzah. So let me give you another example. A purse, okay, or a wallet. Imagine the following situation. A person has a wallet. Think about their wallet. They have credit cards, they have cash. All this stuff is muktzah, okay? They have a picture in their wallet. They're talking to somebody on Shabbos, and something about the picture comes up. And they say, oh, let me go to my wallet and pull out the picture. That, I think, would not be okay, because the wallet is so primarily there for the credit cards, the cash. The picture is so extremely secondary to the other contents of the wallet that I think the wallet really is defined by the muktzah items. And that means the wallet is muktzah. I can't be picking up the wallet. So, but I think the drawer example of muktzah and non-muktzah items, my guess is there's something of comparable value that's not muktzah in the drawer. So you could open the drawer, you could take out the non-muktzah item. Now this is an interesting question. May I close the drawer? Let's say the only non-muktzah item I just took out. You know, there's something important, there's like this directory, but everything else is muktzah. So the truth is, the drawer is not muktzah, because the laws of muktzah are defined by the outset of Shabbos. Normally speaking, we might get into an exception later in the presentation, but normally speaking, Hilchos Muktzah are defined by the outset of Shabbos. So at the outset of Shabbos, in my drawer, I had pens and my shul directory. So at that moment, the drawer was not muktzah. So even if I take the shul directory out at some point over Shabbos, the drawer was not muktzah at the outset of Shabbos, so therefore it's not muktzah now either. Okay? Okay. Thank you. That was a very interesting question. Next question. Person has Shabbos candles on a bookcase. Okay, so a person has a bookcase. They have all kinds of svarim on their bookcase, and on one of the shelves of the bookcase, they light their Shabbos candles. Okay, I'm just gonna summarize the question briefly. I hope the person doesn't mind. Is there any problem with taking svarim from the bookcase on Shabbos if the person lit Shabbos candles there? So this is a very good example, and this fits very much with the principles we were talking about before. So a few things. First of all, the bookcase is not considered a buses, is not considered subservient to the Shabbos candles, because, by the way, clearly what's the primary purpose of the bookcase? The primary purpose of the bookcase clearly is to hold books, right? So it's definitely not defined by the candles. The bookcase is not muktzah. If someone had a sudden urge to move their bookcase from point A to point B on Shabbos, hopefully after the candles have gone out, then they would be totally fine in moving the bookcase from point A to point B. The bookcase is not at all defined by the Shabbos candles, and certainly something else that was on the bookcase that wasn't underneath the Shabbos candles is also not muktzah. So the book, a sefer that's on the bookcase, is certainly not muktzah. Just for contrast, if, on the other hand, a person had a folding table, and on top of the folding table, they had a tablecloth, and on top of the tablecloth, they had Shabbos candles with a tray, so not only would the table be muktzah, because the primary function of the table is to hold the Shabbos candles, but even the tablecloth would be muktzah, because there's nothing, the tray is on the tablecloth, but the tray is defined by the candles. So there's nothing else on the table other than the candles and the tray. So the table is muktzah, and even the tablecloth would be muktzah. If, on the other hand, a person this is the famous example, a person puts their challah on the table before Shabbos, or a kiddush cup or a challah board. Those are important things for Shabbos. So the tray holding the candles would be muktzah because the tray is exclusively holding the candles. But the table wouldn't be muktzah because there's something very important for Shabbos on the table, not just the candles. And the tablecloth wouldn't be muktzah for that matter. Okay. So those are the topics in terms of buses. Okay, this next question is a really interesting one. Thank you for this one. So a person finishes using a utensil over the course of Shabbos. Person finishes using a tissue box. A person finishes, empties a milk container over Shabbos. So a few interesting questions about that. Question number one. Does the item take on muktzah status now that it's empty? Does the item take on muktzah status now that it's empty? So that is a really, really interesting question. And I want to take a little bit of a step back to hopefully clearly answer that question. We mentioned already that muktzah status is defined by what's going on at the outset of Shabbos. At the outset of Shabbos, this tissue box had tissues in it. So it's certainly not muktzah on the outset of Shabbos. Now, as Shabbos has progressed, the tissue box is now empty, but the tissue box will not get a new muktzah status on Shabbos. That's statement number one. Statement number two is that the only time that something would get a new muktzah status on Shabbos is if it fundamentally changed. So I'll give you an example that's near and dear to my heart, not as prevalent in my life as dirty diapers, but a close second. Let's say there's an empty tissue box, and one of the small people in my home decide to wage war on this empty tissue box and take it and decide that there could be nothing more productive than ripping it in half. Now, that half box is probably not a functional item anymore. That half box has had a substantive change that changed its essence, and actually it's not usable on Shabbos anymore, assuming it's really completely not usable on Shabbos. That could be a question. But if something substantively changed, so then it would have a new status. It would have a new status on Shabbos. But an empty tissue box is not considered a substantive change. So even if it became, or an empty milk carton is not considered a substantive change. So if it wasn't muktzah before Shabbos, it's not muktzah on Shabbos. Let's change the question, if I may. Let's say it's an empty box before Shabbos. Let's say it's an empty milk carton. I finished the milk on Friday morning and I didn't get a chance to put it outside in the recycling. And it's lying around my kitchen. Is it muktzah? So here's the story. That milk carton, remember we started with is it a vessel? Is it usable for Shabbos? That milk carton is totally usable for Shabbos, right? If you wanted to, you might not want to, but that's your decision. You could wash it out. You could store water in it. I mean, you could do a lot of things with that milk carton if you wanted. Now, if you decide not to, that's your business, but that doesn't mean it's not usable for Shabbos. So even if it was empty before Shabbos, I would say it's not muktzah. The one situation that I would say it could become muktzah is if you already put it in your recycling bin before Shabbos began. You know what you're saying if you put it in your recycling bin? You, the owner, are defining it. You're saying, I have no use for this anymore. If you, the owner, have actively done something to demonstrate that you have no function for this anymore, then it's muktzah. But even that is only if you did so before Shabbos. Okay. This is it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's a very relevant tangent. So I hope you'll bear with me. Is it okay to remove the plastic flaps on a tissue box on Shabbos that you've done? So I kind of want to get it ready for disposal. Are you allowed to remove the plastic flaps on a tissue box on Shabbos, or are you allowed to rinse out, I think that means rinse out like the milk carton. Are you allowed to do those things on Shabbos? So that's an interesting question too. So I think I would think removing the plastic flaps, it's probably some form of tearing in some way or another. I'm not sure I'm fully visualizing what you're saying, but I think it would be a form of tearing. So I would think offhand that would be problematic on Shabbos. I think so. So I would think. There's an interesting question. Is washing out a milk carton or a wine bottle or something like that, is that considered preparation for after Shabbos? What do I mean by that? Let's think this through for a second. Why am I washing these things out? So most of the time, when we wash things out, especially recyclables and things like that, it's to make it appropriate for recycling. In a sense, you could argue that by my washing out the bottle, I'm really kind of preparing for later in the week. And I'm not supposed to do acts of preparation on Shabbos for after Shabbos. But if you could make the argument that washing it out will be more clean in the house, or will make things not smelly, or will not attract bugs, the example that's very stark for me is a wine bottle. An empty wine bottle, particularly if it, if it doesn't have a top, if it doesn't have a usable top, an empty wine bottle, leaving an empty wine bottle on hot days like this, leaving an empty wine bottle out in your house without rinsing it out, you could totally attract bugs, right? So there you could very well make the argument, I'm rinsing it out because I don't want to attract bugs, right? So that would certainly be reasonable. But personally, I think if the only reason to rinse it out is to make it appropriate for recycling, I could see that as a problem of preparing for after Shabbos. But again, it could be that there are other reasons why a person's rinsing it out. Thank you for those. Those were very interesting. Okay. This is a very advanced question. I'll just ask the question, then I'll explain a little bit of where it's coming from. So let's say a person walks in the rain. And I personally successfully walk in between the raindrops. I don't know about any of you, but okay. So a person walks in the rain, and their garments got drenched. Okay, so the question is an interesting one. Does it become muktzah because it's drenched? Does the fact that it got so wet make it muktzah? Now let me explain where this question is coming from. The halacha is that if at the outset of Shabbos there are clothes that are very, very wet, normally we say they're muktzah. And the reason why it would be muktzah is as follows. I'm not allowed to do something that will squeeze liquid out of something which has already absorbed the liquid. That's an issue on Shabbos. So if at the outset of Shabbos, this clothing is not wearable, because even picking it up, it's like the moment I pick up the shirt or whatever it is, it's like, liquid is going to start seeping out of it because I apply any pressure to it, it squeezes it out. So it's not wearable for me at the outset of Shabbos. Halachically, it's a problem. And therefore, clothing that's very wet, we normally say the definition of very wet is if I would touch it with my hand, not squeeze it, but if I would touch it with my hand would become wet. In other words, like it could, not just that I feel moisture, like it could make something else wet. So if it's that wet at the outset of Shabbos, it's considered muktzah. This, if I'm not mistaken, is another example of muktzah being defined by the circumstances at the outset of Shabbos and not during Shabbos. So if it became very wet at some point on Shabbos, I'm allowed to keep on wearing it as long as I have it on. That's just a good thing to know. But once I take it off, you come home, you're drenched, you take it off. So the fact that at the outset of Shabbos it was a normal coat or jacket or whatever, the fact that it became very wet on Shabbos does not render it muktzah for the rest of Shabbos. Whereas if it was that wet at the outset of Shabbos, it would be muktzah for Shabbos. I should clarify one thing about that, which is if it's a situation that it is rapidly becoming dry, such as if it's in the dryer when Shabbos begins, I'm not allowed to be turning on the dryer when Shabbos begins. But if it was already in the dryer when Shabbos began and the dryer was on and everything like that, then actually we say it would not be muktzah once it's dry, because as long as there's a way for me to access it on Shabbos, because it's sort of in the process of getting dry. Okay. Really interesting question. What's the story with packages and muktzah on Shabbos? Person gets a package on Shabbos. Is it muktzah? Is it not muktzah? We normally say that mail is muktzah. That's what we normally say. The reason we normally say mail is muktzah, it could be that a specific item in the mail is not muktzah. If, for example, if you get like a magazine in the mail, and it's not like you have to open it or anything. It's just there. It's a magazine. I mean, you have to open it in order to read it. But I mean, there's no packaging that you have to open. So that wouldn't be muktzah. But if it's bills and the like, it's not considered appropriate to read those things on Shabbos. So things like that, it'd be questionable how to open the envelope in the first place. So things like that, we normally treat as muktzah. Standard mail, we normally treat as muktzah. I have a strange thing. The mailbox in my house is on my door. And many times, thank God, as my kids are floating in and out of the house, they just kind of, the screen door is closed, but the storm door is open. And understandably, the mailman is not interested in like wandering into my doorway to, wandering into my front hall. So, if the door is open, they just leave the mail, just on the ground. And obviously that's not so ideal for me, especially if I don't want to pick up the mail. So we have this bizarre thing in our house. I try to encourage my dear children to close the door, but it doesn't work very well. But every now and then I'll see the mailman coming and I say, quick, close the door. The mailman is coming, close the door. So add it to the list of foibles. But the bottom line is we would normally say that we would normally treat muktzah, mail as muktzah. Question is, what about packages? So if the item that I know what's coming, many times we get an Amazon package, we know exactly what's supposed to be coming. So if the item is a muktzah item, I ordered, a Keurig or something, if the item is a muktzah item, of course the package is muktzah, that's certainly. But the question is, let's say the item is not a muktzah item. Let's say a person orders medications by mail. And I'm not talking about a dramatic question like something that has to be refrigerated. That of course would be much more sensitive. Shiloh. Let's say it's a regular, it'll be fine. Is that package muktzah? So I think if you know what's inside of it, I think you could probably, and that what's inside is not muktzah, especially if you had concerns about just leaving it where it is. I think you could probably make the argument that you could pick up the package and bring it in the house. Because we're kind of wary to open those kind of things on Shabbos anyway. If you didn't have a need to bring it inside the house, I would say it's better to just leave it where it is. If it was something that you had real concerns about leaving it outside the house, so if it's something that you have good reason to believe that what's inside is not actually a muktzah item, you should definitely be able to pick it up and put it inside the house. If you know that it's a muktzah item, or it's highly likely that it's a muktzah item, and you're scared about leaving it outside, then probably the best thing to do is to move it in an abnormal way. That's actually a little bit different than, let's say, moving it indirectly. That's even more lenient. To move it in an abnormal way is to, it might be to kind of nudge it in with your foot. It might be, if it's a light enough item, to kind of pick it up with your elbows. But something like that, if you're concerned about it, that I believe would be the best thing to do. And I think I answered the mail question also. If you just instinctively take the mail from the person, I would just carry it to wherever you carry it and put it down. But I think it is better to not take the mail by hand from the mailman on Shabbos. Last question. It's actually, I could understand why the person thought it was, but I'll just say the question. What's the status with the door knocker? What's the story of the door knocker on Shabbos? The thing, the thing attached to the door. So it's actually not a muktzah issue. It's something else. There's a rabbinic prohibition on musical instruments on Shabbos. Now, what are the guidelines for musical instrument? So the halacha guideline for musical instrument is any utensil that's fashioned to create a sound. So we normally say that a knocker is definitely a utensil fashioned to create a sound. So it's an interesting thing. So the normal halachic approach is to not use door knockers on Shabbos. Obviously, one could knock on the door because there I'm making a noise. It's not an instrument. It's not an item. But that's the story with that. Okay, so thank you to all those who asked questions. This is a drop earlier than we normally open up for questions, but my hope is that people have, been inspired to ask some things based on some examples that we gave. So we'll open up for questions. If there's time at the end, I'll talk about some other muktzah-related things, but if not, I'm happy to fill the rest of the time with questions. We'll start with the chats. Hold on. Let's see. We had begun the evening talking about the special dispensation from the rabbis that if something is considered disgusting, it's not restricted by the laws of muktzah. The question posed was about dog poop. I think that's the technical term, dog poop. So you're right, dog poop would also be included in graf shorei, and that would be completely permissible to move on Shabbos as long as it's in a place that's disturbing. I would certainly say that if a person took the dog for a walk and the dog relieved itself in someone else's area, I would certainly say that it's appropriate to clean that up because I would definitely encourage you to not just leave it there. Now, if the Erev isn't up, that's a separate issue. The allowance of disgusting things does not apply to the Erev not being up. So that requires some real strategy. If a person takes their dog for a walk on Shabbos and there's no Erev, that I'm happy to discuss offline or at another time. But in terms of muktzah, definitely included in the allowance of graf shorei. Okay. Thank you very much, Menashe. Menashe says that he has junk everywhere. B'chol drawer v'drawer. Very, very nice. Thank you, Menashe. That was great. Great question. Great question. Thank you, Gilda. Person has a stack of chairs that they were planning to use for Shabbos, and you put your purse, you just put your purse down when you came in on Friday afternoon. You put it on the top chair on the stack. What happens? What do you do? And I'll say that if you apply the laws of buses, it would apply all the way down, theoretically. But I would argue too that in this case, the laws of buses would not apply. And the reason why the laws of buses would not apply is because buses only works if it was intentionally done that way by the owner. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you wanted to make things muktzah. But if you put down the purse on the stack of chairs, and if I were to have asked you at that moment, if I were to ask you, do you plan on keeping the purse there for Shabbos? Or do you even plan on keeping the purse there long term? Forget Shabbos or not. Just do you plan on keeping the purse there long term? My guess is that you would say, that's not where I keep my purse. I just put my purse down. I plan on picking it up in a few minutes. So it was not intended to be left there. So in a case where you don't intend to leave it there, that does not define buses. What does define buses is some of the examples that were given, like in a drawer. You intend to leave your pens in there. I'll give you an example that I think is a real buses thing. Many of us have guest rooms that we don't normally use. So we put all kinds of chazarai in the guest room. We have our junk drawer, we have our junk room, junk all over the place. So many of us will have a bed in the guest room that we have all kinds of chazarai on. And we leave chazarai there day to day, week to week. And whatever, there's muktzah stuff. Let's say there's one muktzah item that you put on that bed. And by the way, you very well might leave it there for a while. Wasn't unintended. and then you didn't realize, you forgot that there was a guest coming for Shabbos. You wanted to put that thing on the bed. You forgot other circumstances, but it wasn't out of the ordinary to put that thing on the bed. So in that case, the bed is defined by the muktzah item that you put down. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay. Oh, that is a really good question, Shoshana. Person's walking to shul before Shabbos, before sunset, and their coat gets totally drenched. The coat gets totally drenched. Is it possible that it's a muktzah issue? It is possible that it's a muktzah issue. There are probably leniencies to at least wear it home so they don't get drenched. There are some leniencies with that. So at the very least, I think it would be okay to wear it home. It could be that if they have another coat at home, they should wear the other coat over Shabbos. But I believe that if that's the only way the person had to keep themselves dry, there would be leniencies about that. I don't want to get into the details of that right now. It's a little far afield, but that's a great question. Okay, thank you, very interesting. The question posed is, are newspapers considered muktzah? Different opinions. Many opinions are strict about it. I will tell you that Rabbi Eimer Zichrono Livracha was lenient about it. If people are strict about it, they're not being crazy. But as I'm sure many people here can attest, there were times when Rabbi Eimer quoted the newspaper Shabbos morning in his drasha. So I think he was an absolutely brilliant person, but he probably still needed to have a newspaper to quote it. Rabbi Eimer was definitely lenient about it. But I repeat, if you know someone who's strict about it, they're not being crazy, but you definitely have what to rely on. Thank you for that. Okay, that's a very interesting question. Can flowers in a vase be moved off a table? So let's talk about what the status of the flowers is. Remember, we began the discussion talking about that everything has to fit into a category. So what category are flowers? Now, I'll tell you one thing for sure. If the flowers were picked on Shabbos, you have a non-Jewish neighbor or something who brings you flowers, the flowers were picked on Shabbos, it's definitely muktzah, because at the outset of Shabbos, it was totally hands off. You're not allowed to pick flowers on Shabbos, that's for sure. Let's say the flowers were sitting in a vase before Shabbos. If the flowers were sitting in a vase before Shabbos, they have been defined as a decorative piece in the home. Since they're defined as a decorative piece in the home, I think it's reasonable to categorize that as a kli, as a utensil for use on Shabbos. And I would say that it's not muktzah. Okay. Now there's a separate issue. The separate issue about if you move flowers closer to the sunlight, that could be a question. But let's assume you're not exposing them to. You're just moving them from one point to another within the house. And, if it's in the vase before Shabbos, it's definitely not a problem. I would say it's not muktzah. Even if it's not in the vase before Shabbos, but it's it's in the package, to you get in the store, it's all ready for Shabbos. It's already, the fact that it's in their packaging and somebody bought it, you bought it, somebody else bought it, whatever it is, it's also clearly a statement that's be used for decorative purposes on Shabbos. I would not say that's muktzah, but what I would say is you're not allowed to put it in water on Shabbos. So in other words, if you didn't get around to dealing with the flowers before Shabbos, again, if they're just wild flowers, they're muktzah because they weren't defined for the purpose of being decorative before Shabbos. But if they were flowers in a in a bundle, whatever, in a packaging, or certainly in a vase, I would say they're not muktzah, but you were not allowed to put them in water on Shabbos. So if you realize, oh my gosh, I forgot to do something with the flowers, you could just put them in a vase, but I wouldn't put water in the vase. But maybe it's maybe it's an opaque vase and people won't know the difference. You could do that. I hope I answered the question. Thank you, Gilda. Okay, so that's a great question, Sigla. Thank you very much. Let's give a scenario. You have recyclables in the recycling bin. So wait, let's go step by step. So if it's, I have my my bottles of seltzer or whatever, and I've been using them in the house, and now they're empty. So I want to take them out the recycling bin. It is absolutely fine to take them out the recycling bin on Shabbos. Absolutely fine. You don't even need to justify it because it's not muktzah, and you're taking them out. It's totally fine. You're taking them out because that's the logical place they go. You don't want to clutter your house. That's totally fine. What would be a question? Obviously, assuming there's an Erev. What would be a question to me would be if you had the recyclables in your like in-house recycling bin, like many of us like have like a receptacle that we hold for recyclables in the house, and then like when it fills up, we take it outside. So if it was in the recycling bin before Shabbos, you probably have defined it as kind of being off limits. If it was put in the recycling bin on Shabbos, I would say it's not muktzah. So if you need to make more space because you have more recyclables, you want to take that out, that's fine. But the stuff that was in the recycling bin before Shabbos, I would be very reluctant to take out on Shabbos. The bothering is not the same level of bothering as the potato peels or the dirty diaper. So it's bothering because it's clutter. I don't think it's disgusting. And if it is disgusting, you could certainly wash it out. That's for sure. I hope I answered the question. Thank you very much. Yes, fully agreed. Plants in soil. If it may plants in soil be moved on Shabbos. If it's got holes on the bottom, definitely not. If I remember correctly, I think common practice is not to move it, even if it doesn't have holes on the bottom. But I have to double check. I apologize. Thank you. Yeah. Pets is a whole complicated discussion. There are definitely opinions that are more strict, definitely opinions that are more lenient. It's a wide range. I'm not sure I'm going to get into it. If people want to discuss it, I'm happy to discuss privately. It's a very, very, very valid point, Ariel. But I'd rather discuss that person to person for people who want. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Okay. Thank you so much to everybody for bearing with us. I know the timing was a little bit stranger tonight, but thank you for taking the time to join us. We need to figure out a next topic. Miriam and I were discussing. I think what came out for us, I think, is most interesting. Hopefully, that people will find interesting, is halachos in terms of if people need to be in the hospital on Shabbos, sort of how to deal with things, getting to the hospital, in the hospital. That'll be one possibility. Another possibility would have to do with issues in terms of illness on Shabbos. Right, illness on Shabbos. Thank you, Miriam. So whether it be hospital illness or issues in terms of having non-Jews do things for you on Shabbos. Any quick sentiments one way or the other, or additional suggestions people can put in the chat. Again, so it's sort of like hospital on Shabbos, illness on Shabbos, issues involving non-Jews doing things on Shabbos. Yeah, right. It'll be, yeah. Ruthie will be included in that. Yeah, that's a good one, Miriam. Yeah. Any other comments? Okay, I'm not
I have a question, Rabbi, about the example of the muktzah that was placed on the bed.
I'm going to come back to it in 1 second. Ruthie, I just don't, I don't want to, I'm sorry, just give me.
Okay.
Thank you for the 3 weeks suggestion.
Oh.
I feel like it's not going to be such a, thought about it. I'm not sure. Not sure it could be so. I mean, we're sending out this week in Hashem general guidance for the 3 weeks and the 9 days. Not so. I'm not sure that'll be like a full topic for discussion. That I'm a little wary to use it. I thought about it. Think of an idea. It sounds like. I mean, we'll see. Maybe keep on considering the question, everybody. I'm going to come back to Ruthie's question. Okay, so here's the story. So, Ruthie, if you had a muktzah item, you're talking about what you chatted, right?
Right.
Right. If you had a muktzah item on the bed before Shabbos, if you had a muktzah item on the bed before Shabbos, so then, and you wanted to have it, you didn't want to make the bed muktzah, but you wanted the thing to be there. So then the sheets take on the same muktzah status as the muktzah item. Now, something that we didn't get into tonight is different types of muktzah. Some muktzah items, if you need it, you're allowed to use it on Shabbos. You're allowed to move it.
Right.
Some muktzah items, even if you need it, you're not allowed to. So it depends. If the muktzah item was a pen, if I need a pen for something, not for writing, but if I need a pen, desperately trying to scratch my back and I can't find anything to scratch my back with, and the only thing I can find is a pen, I'm allowed to use a pen for that. So that means that if the sheets take on the same status as the pen, which means if I need the sheets, excuse me, I can move the sheets. So I could just pick up the pen and I'm fine. But if, for example, I threw my wallet onto the bed, so the wallet is totally defined by the money in my wallet. Money is not considered a kli. The wallet is totally muktzah. So that means the sheets are totally muktzah. So it's not just an issue in pushing off the wallet. It'll be an issue in indirectly pushing off the sheets. It'd be like a whole complicated thing. Yeah. Thank you. Any other thoughts about what to do? Okay, so I think we'll if anyone has any great ideas between now, in the next week or so, feel free to email me. But absent it, I think we'll go with dealing with issues regarding illness on Shabbos, and I think it'll be a broad enough discussion. In terms of when to do it, my guess is we're probably, I think we're probably talking about the end of July, if that sounds okay for people. Near the end of July, if that's all right for people. But we'll send out an email about that. Miriam, we can talk about that. Okay. Again, thank you everyone for joining us, and particularly thank you to Miriam, and thank you to all those who submitted questions. Have a wonderful night, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.